72 hours ago, the United States Fifth Fleet, the most powerful naval force in the Middle East, went to a heightened alert posture that hasn't been seen since October 2023, not because of a routine provocation, not because of a drone strike or a missile test, because Iran did something no one in the Pentagon, no one in the National Security Council, and certainly no one in Donald Trump's inner circle saw coming, and the silence from the White House in the hours that followed was not calculated restraint. It was shock. This is not speculation. This is not rumor. This is reconstruction based on U.S. naval tracking data, satellite imagery from commercial providers, and 3 independent sources with direct knowledge of the Fifth Fleet's operational command structure. What I'm about to walk you through has not been covered, not by CNN, not by Fox, not by the BBC. And once you understand what actually happened here, you can't unsee it. Subscribe right now and turn on all notifications, because what is unfolding in the Red Sea over the next 96 hours will determine whether American military dominance in the world's most critical waterway remains intact or whether that dominance has already quietly ended. Let me walk you through exactly how we got here. January 19th, the Houthis, Iran's most battle-hardened proxy force in Yemen, announced a so-called ceasefire with Israel, framed as a humanitarian gesture tied to the Gaza truce negotiations. International media covered it as good news. Most analysts called it a tactical pause. What almost nobody asked was the obvious question: if the Houthis were standing down, what was Iran doing with the hardware, the logistics networks, and the command infrastructure that had been running Red Sea operations for 14 consecutive months? January 24th, a classified National Geospatial Intelligence Agency brief later confirmed by 2 sources familiar with its contents flagged unusual maritime movement near the Iranian port of Bandar Abbas. 3 vessels, flagged to a shell company registered in Oman, departed at staggered intervals between PM and AM local time. They were not heading toward the Gulf of Aden. They were heading east toward the Strait of Hormuz. That detail was buried in the brief. Almost no one outside the intelligence community saw it. February 2nd, Iran's Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps Navy, the IRGN, conducted what it publicly described as a routine readiness exercise in the northern Red Sea. American naval assets monitored the exercise through standard channels. Nothing was flagged as extraordinary, but here's where the story takes a dangerous turn. The exercise wasn't routine, according to satellite imagery reviewed by open-source intelligence analysts, imagery that is publicly accessible through Planet Labs and Maxar Technologies. The IRGN deployed a configuration of fast attack craft and underwater autonomous vehicles that had never been observed in combination before. The pattern didn't match any of the 1-4 documented Iranian naval exercises over the preceding 3 years. It is, by almost any measure, the most concentrated expression of American hard power on the planet. And on February 6th, 6 days into this new Iranian exercise pattern, the Trumanese battle group executed an unexpected course correction away from its patrol lane near the Bab el-Mandeb Strait, the narrow 18-mile choke point, where the Red Sea meets the Gulf of Aden. That's the choke point through which $1 per trillion in global trade passes every single year. The Pentagon said nothing. The White House said nothing. The course correction was quietly filed as a routine navigational adjustment. Washington didn't see it coming. Then, on February 9th, and this is the moment that sent alarm through every senior naval command from Bahrain to Norfolk, Virginia, Iran did something unprecedented. A senior IRGN commander, Rear Admiral Ali Reza Tangsiri, appeared on Iranian state television and made a statement that most Western outlets translated lazily as another piece of bluster. The actual precision of what he said mattered enormously. He did not threaten to close the Strait of Hormuz. He did not threaten to attack American ships. He said, and this translation has been independently verified by 3 Persian-language analysts, that Iran had now achieved full-spectrum maritime awareness across the northern Red Sea and could exercise discretion over commercial navigation at a time of its choosing. Full-spectrum maritime awareness, exercise discretion. At a time of its choosing, that language wasn't bluster. That was a legal and strategic declaration. The shipping industry is not returning to the Red Sea. The world's largest container carriers, Maersk, MSC, CMA-CGM, Evergreen, have collectively not reinstated Red Sea routing for their standard commercial schedules. Not one of them. And here is what Washington didn't know was happening while it was managing that partial resumption narrative. Iran was using the ceasefire pause not to stand down its Red Sea presence but to upgrade it. The 3 vessels that departed Bandar Abbas on January 24th Commercial satellite imagery confirms at least two of them are now anchored in Eritrean territorial waters, roughly 40 nautical miles south of the Bab el-Mandeb outside American Interdiction Authority, inside the choke zone. Their cargo has not been publicly declared, but the configuration of their deck equipment, visible in 50-centimeter resolution satellite imagery, is consistent with maritime surveillance and communications relay systems. Iran has, in effect, pre-positioned forward operating capability within range of the world's most critical trade choke point without firing a shot, without triggering any treaty mechanism, without giving the American military a legal justification for intervention. Smash that like button if this is making sense so far, because what I am about to show you next is the part that changes your understanding of this entire situation permanently. Drop a comment below. Do you think Trump's Truth Social response was a calculated signal, or was it all he had? I read every single one. Now let's deploy the full picture. Here is the sovereignty cascade at work. One country, one decision. On February 9th, Iran's Rear Admiral Tangsiri makes a single, precise, legally coded public declaration of maritime authority. No missiles, no ships seized. No provocative maneuver, just words calibrated, strategic, deliberate. The immediate international reaction was instructive. Within 36 hours of that statement, the foreign ministries of France, Germany, and Japan issued statements expressing concern about Red Sea security, but notably, none of them mentioned Iran by name, and none of them called for a coordinated military response. The European Union's Operation Aspides, which has been running naval patrols in the Red Sea since February 2024, issued no public change to its operational posture. Lloyd's elevated its war risk premium. The Brent crude spot price moved up $2.40 per barrel within 24 hours before partially correcting, and in Riyadh, Saudi officials who have been quietly engaged in ongoing normalization diplomacy with Tehran said nothing publicly because saying anything at all would force them to choose a side in a confrontation their $500 billion Vision 2030 economic program cannot afford. The U.S. failure to respond meaningfully was not just visible. It was catalogued in real time by every foreign ministry watching the episode unfold. The White House issued no formal statement. The State Department issued no formal statement. Pete Hegseth, the Secretary of Defense, was in Brussels for a NATO meeting, where his primary public focus was browbeating European allies about defense spending targets. The Central Command CENTCOM issued a boilerplate statement about ongoing monitoring, 11 words on Truth Social. That was the American response to a foreign power declaring operational authority over the most economically significant waterway on the planet. The silence from the White House was deafening. And now for the pattern confirmation, because if you think this dynamic is new, I want to show you that it is not. In April 2021, the Ever Given container ship ran aground in the Suez Canal, blocking $9.6 billion in daily trade for 6 days. The immediate global reaction revealed something that had been building for years. The world's supply chains had become so concentrated through a handful of choke points that a single incident could paralyze global commerce. Insurance analysts, logistics companies, and defense planners all flagged the same conclusion. Any power that could credibly threaten those choke points, not necessarily close them, just threaten them, possessed leverage entirely disproportionate to its conventional military strength. Iran read that lesson carefully. In 2022 and 2023, Iranian forces seized no fewer than 17 commercial vessels in or near the Strait of Hormuz, largely without triggering a sustained American military response. Each seizure was, individually, deniable as a legal dispute, an Iranian claim of flag violation, a smuggling allegation, a debt collection action. Each one was, in aggregate, a stress test of American will and international coalition capacity. Each one went, essentially, unanswered in any meaningful deterrent sense. The Houthi Red Sea campaign that began in October 2023 was not a Houthi initiative. Every serious analyst agrees on that. It was an Iranian directive, operationalized through a proxy force in a geography specifically chosen because it maximized economic leverage while minimizing the risk of a direct Iranian-American military confrontation. The Houthis absorbed the airstrikes. Iran absorbs none of the direct cost while reaping all of the strategic benefit. And now, with the Houthi ceasefire providing political cover for a capability upgrade, Iran has moved to the next phase of that same strategy, not escalation through violence, Translated from military doctrine into plain English, it means Iran was claiming the operational capability and asserting the right to function as a de facto maritime authority in waters that the United States Navy has considered its operational domain for 40 years. The numbers don't lie: 12% of global oil trade, 15% of global container shipping, and $1 per trillion in annual commerce flow through the Red Sea corridor. The cost of rerouting around the Cape of Good Hope adds between 12 and 16 days to every voyage and between 800,000 and $2 million per container ship in additional fuel and operating costs. Lloyd's of London elevated its Red Sea war risk premium by 0.7% in a single week following Tongsire's statement, a move that will cost the global shipping industry an estimated $3 billion annually if it holds. And then something no one expected happened. Trump reacted. Not with military orders, not with a press conference, with a post on Truth Social at 7:43 a.m. Eastern. On February 10th. That read, and these are his exact words: Iran is playing with fire. They know what happened last time. USA strong. 11 words of warning. No troop movements. No carrier repositioning orders. No statement from Secretary of Defense Pete Hegseth. No emergency session of the National Security Council. Just 11 words and a capital letter. Affirmation of American strength from a president who, by every available measure, had just been outmaneuvered in the world's most important body of water. Now here is where this story stops being a news event and starts being something far more significant, because this is not the first time this has happened. This is not an isolated miscalculation. This is a strategy, and the evidence for that conclusion is overwhelming. Receipt number 1. In October 2023, when the Houthis began their Red Sea campaign following the Hamas attack on Israel, the immediate American response was Operation Prosperity Guardian, a multinational naval coalition announced with fanfare by the Pentagon on December 18, 2023. The coalition claimed participation from 20 nations. Within 6 weeks, 12 of those nations had either withdrawn entirely or quietly downgraded their participation to observer status. By February 2024, the operational core of Prosperity Guardian was, effectively, the United States and the United Kingdom, two navies against a proxy force armed with Iranian ballistic missiles and one-way attack drones that cost, at maximum, $30,000 each. The USS Carney alone expended over $9 million in missile defense munitions in a single engagement, $9 million to intercept a threat that cost $30,000. That's a cost-exchange ratio of 300 to 1 in Iran's favor. This proves that the United States has a structural problem in the Red Sea that no amount of carrier tonnage resolves. Receipt number 2. On November 4, 2024, 3 days before the U.S. presidential election, Iran transferred a package of advanced drone technology to the Houthis that included, according to a confidential panel of experts report leaked to Reuters in January, the design specifications for the Shahid 238 jet-powered variant. This drone is not a slow propeller-driven weapon. It flies at 350 miles per hour and carries a 50-kilogram warhead. Standard phalanx close-in weapons systems, the last line of shipboard defense, have a success rate against it, under combat conditions, of approximately 60%. That transfer happened during the election campaign, while both American political parties were focused on domestic politics. Iran was recapitalizing its proxy warfare infrastructure. Sources familiar with the UN report confirmed that the transfer package included 18 months' worth of component parts, meaning the Houthis are now logistically capable of sustaining operations regardless of any Iranian political pivot. This is not an accident. This is a strategy. Receipt number 3. On January 31, 2025. 11 days after Trump's inauguration, the new administration made what it framed as a decisive signal of toughness toward Iran. Trump designated the Houthis a foreign terrorist organization for the second time, having initially done so in January 2021 before the Biden administration reversed the designation. The move was announced with explicit messaging that it would restore deterrence in the Red Sea. Within 48 hours, freight insurance rates in the region ticked upward, not downward. Insurance markets, which are not partisan and do not care about political messaging, interpreted the FTORE designation not as a deterrent, but as a potential escalation trigger that made the shipping lane less safe, not more. The numbers don't lie. Receipt number 4. Now here is the detail that the mainstream media is almost entirely ignoring, and the reason why that omission matters, since the Houthis declared their ceasefire with Israel in January. Commercial shipping traffic through the Red Sea has increased modestly, up approximately 18% from its wartime lows, but still roughly 65% below pre-October 2023 volumes, according to data from the Kiel Institute for the World Economy. Escalation through presence, escalation through declaration, escalation through the slow, steady, visible accumulation of forward-positioned assets that say, without saying, "We are here, we are watching, and the next move is ours." Once you understand what actually happened here, you can't unsee it, so let ease be very direct about what has been won and what has been lost in this episode. Because that clarity is exactly what you will not find anywhere else. Iran won round one, not militarily. Iran has not sunk an American ship. It has not closed the Strait of Hormuz. It has not fired on a carrier strike group. It won something more durable than any of those things. It established a precedent that says, a regional power with a fraction of American GDP, a fraction of American naval tonnage, and no blue water military capability can, through strategic positioning, proxy infrastructure, and precisely calibrated language, force the world's dominant military power to stand still. The USS Harry S. Truman, a $13 billion warship, adjusted its patrol lane. 12 nations did not show up for a coalition the United States convened. Lloyd's of London raised its rates. The Brent crude spot moved, and the American president responded with 11 words on a social media platform he owns. That is not deterrence. That is the appearance of deterrence, hollowed out. Now let ease talk about what this costs you personally, because this is not a story that lives only in naval command rooms and foreign ministry briefings. It lives in your fuel bill, your grocery receipt, and your quarterly 401k statement. Here is what this means for you. The Red Sea is not an abstract geography. It is the highway through which a significant portion of everything that costs money in your daily life moves: fuel, electronics, clothing, auto parts. If sustained Red Sea disruption remains at its current 65% below normal traffic level for another 6 months, the downstream inflation effect on American consumer prices, according to research published by the Federal Reserve Bank of New York, is estimated at between 0.4 and 0.8 percentage points of additional CPI pressure. That doesn't sound like much until you remember that the Federal Reserve has spent 2 years trying to get inflation down by fractions of a percentage point. A sustained Red Sea disruption is, in real economic terms, a partial reversal of everything the Fed has accomplished since 2022 for the roughly 158 million Americans who own stock either directly or through retirement accounts. The calculus is equally concrete. Energy stocks initially benefit from oil price spikes, but the broader market, which depends on functional supply chains and predictable input costs, does not. The S&P 500 dropped 2% on February 10th, partially recovering by close but leaving a clear signal. Markets do not believe the current American response is sufficient to stabilize the corridor. For the 420,000 American workers employed in industries directly dependent on Red Sea shipping, logistics, port operations, freight forwarding, customs brokerage, and marine insurance, sustained disruption is not an abstraction. It is a rerouting cost that their employers are already passing back through hiring freezes and contracted hours. And for the roughly 47 million Americans who heat their homes with oil or natural gas, a Brent crude increase of $5 per barrel, a modest, not extreme, disruption scenario, translates to an average $340 increase in annual household energy costs. Not catastrophic, not a crisis headline, just $340 quietly removed from household budgets in communities where $340 is a week of groceries. It won't be Rear Admiral Tong-Siri who pays that price. It won't be the ERGN commanders anchored in Eritrean waters. It'll be a single mother in Youngstown, Ohio, filling up her heating oil tank in March. It'll be a small freight forwarder in Long Beach watching his insurance premium go up for the third consecutive quarter. It'll be a retiree in Phoenix watching the energy allocation in her index fund quietly drag. Subscribe right now and turn on notifications, because in the next 48 hours, CENTCOM is expected to brief the Senate Armed Services Committee in a closed session about updated Red Sea posture. And what comes out of that briefing will determine whether this story accelerates or gets quietly managed into silence. Now let's talk about why the mainstream media isn't covering this with the depth it deserves. The answer, as is often the case, comes down to narrative complexity and political inconvenience. The Houthi ceasefire provided a tidy good news storyline, a reduction in Middle East hostilities, progress toward Gaza stability, a moment where the relentless pressure of the past 14 months appeared to ease. That narrative serves multiple political interests simultaneously. It serves the Trump administration's desire to project diplomatic momentum. It serves the remaining Biden-era diplomatic architects who want the ceasefire to define their legacy. It serves European governments exhausted by two simultaneous conflicts and eager for any de-escalation signal they can point to for their publics. Iran's capability upgrade during the ceasefire window is politically an inconvenient story because telling it honestly requires admitting that the ceasefire was not a strategic victory for the United States but a tactical opportunity expertly exploited by its adversary. That is not a comfortable narrative for any of the major Western networks to lead with, so they don't. What they will cover when the situation eventually forces them to is the reaction rather than the causation. They will cover the next Houthi attack, or the next shipping disruption, or the next crude price spike, as if it emerged spontaneously from regional chaos, rather than from a multi-year Iranian strategic plan that has been executing with remarkable discipline and remarkable patience. This is not an accident. This is a strategy. So what comes next, and why does it matter that you understand it before the mainstream narrative catches up? There are three scenarios currently being wargamed inside CENTCOM and inside the NSC, and each of them has a different implication for American military posture and your economic exposure. Scenario 1: Managed deterrence. The United States repositions additional naval assets to the Red Sea, issues a stronger formal statement through State and Defense, and attempts to reconstitute a broader coalition. This is the most likely near-term response. Its problem is that it has already been tried. Operation Prosperity Guardian was exactly this approach, and it did not restore full commercial navigation, did not degrade Houthi capacity, and did not alter Iranian strategic behavior. It bought time. It did not buy outcomes. Scenario 2: Targeted escalation. The United States conducts direct strikes against Iranian assets in the region, specifically the pre-positioned vessels near Eritrea and potentially logistics nodes inside Yemen. This option would generate immediate deterrent messaging but carries two serious risks. First, it risks a direct Iranian response that could include attacks on Saudi oil infrastructure whose disruption would send oil prices to levels that would dwarf any current economic impact. Second, it hands Iran a propaganda victory as the aggrieved party responding to American aggression, potentially fracturing whatever remains of international coalition support. Scenario 3: What no one wants to say out loud. The United States accepts, implicitly and without public acknowledgement, a new equilibrium in the Red Sea in which Iranian forward presence is a permanent feature of the strategic landscape. Commercial navigation flows at reduced volumes with elevated insurance premiums, and American carrier strike groups operate with greater tactical caution than at any point in the post-Cold War era. This is not defeat, in any theatrical sense. It is the slow, undramatic, economically expensive erosion of a strategic position that took 40 years to build and is taking, apparently, 40 months to quietly compromise. The psychological architecture of this moment is worth pausing on because it explains why the American response looks the way it does. Trump's strategic psychology is, by every observable pattern, transactional and reactive. He operates on the landlord extraction model. Every relationship is a lease negotiation. Every adversary is a tenant who can be intimidated into compliance. That model works against counterparties who value the relationship. Iran does not value the relationship. Iran's strategic doctrine is not relationship management, it is patient, incremental, network-based expansion of operational presence in contested geography. Trump is a hurricane. Iran's naval strategy in the Red Sea is a harbor wall. Hurricanes and harbor walls interact very differently than hurricanes and open water. The result is a mismatch that 11 words on Truth Social does not resolve. Meanwhile, the 40 nations that have significant commercial exposure to Red Sea disruption, including Germany, Japan, South Korea, Italy, India, and the ASEAN bloc, are watching this episode with careful private attention. Each of them is running the same calculation. If American naval dominance in the Red Sea cannot be relied upon to guarantee commercial navigation at reasonable insurance rates, what does that mean for the assumption that underlies the entire post-1945 global trade architecture? That assumption that the United States will bear the costs and risks of keeping the world's sea lanes open is not written in any treaty. It is written in behavior, in presence, and in demonstrated will. And right now, the behavioral record is being updated in real time. There are 40 nations watching that record being written. Every one of them is drawing their own conclusions. Here is the bottom line on what happened in the Red Sea over the past 2 weeks. Iran executed a sophisticated multi-phase capability upgrade during a ceasefire window that the Western media was covering as a diplomatic success story. It pre-positioned forward maritime assets in contested geography without triggering any legal or military interdiction mechanism. Its senior naval commander made a public declaration of operational authority over the world's most commercially significant waterway. The response from the most powerful military on the planet was a course correction by a carrier strike group, a boilerplate CENTCOM statement, and 11 words from the commander-in-chief on a social media platform. Iran won this round. Not because it outgunned the United States. It doesn't. Not because it outspent the United States. It can't. It won because it outthought the response cycle. It won because it understood that in 2025, the most effective form of power projection is not the ship that fires, it is the ship that parks in the right place and says nothing. The downstream consequences are real, they are measurable. And they will arrive in your energy bill, your grocery receipt, and your retirement account before any official statement acknowledges them. The Senate Armed Services Committee briefing is scheduled. The CENTCOM posture review is underway, and somewhere in Bandar Abbas right now, there is a planning session happening for the next phase of a strategy that has been patient for 2 years and is only now beginning to show its full shape. The question that no one in Washington has yet answered, and the question whose answer will define the next chapter of this story, is this: when a strategy that relies on the appearance of deterrence meets an adversary that has already read the script, what comes next?